Hey guys, it's Micah Brown here and with Brandon Brody. We're the owners of Annihilator Broadheads. We're here to talk about our personal setups and to answer some questions that we've got on why we shoot what we shoot, different spine, different arrow weights, vanes. So yeah, we'll get into all that here in a little bit.
Yep, so this is what I shoot. I shoot a RIP TKO made by Victory. I love this arrow. I've been shooting it for years. I say before it was cool. I just like it because it's 8.9 grains per inch in a 250 spine, which is my ideal spine. It is the V1 straightness. I shoot right now. I'm shooting the stock vanes that come with it. I believe they're the Q2I vanes. They're over either at a half inch or just over. And I shoot the 75 grain shock adapter. It is the stainless steel version. I like a little more point weight on that. Especially that's why I shoot the 250 spine, to load that front up a little bit. I'm a huge proponent of being in that 15 to 18% FOC for almost any animal that I want to go after. This year I am shooting the Annihilator 100 XL. I'm really excited to shoot this. I will be using this for antelope, mule deer, whitetail, and elk, and maybe even a bear. If one walks in during elk season, I can get after it. So we'll see. But I'm excited for that 100 grain XL. Just put a big hole in that cavity. But for me, this arrow speed out of my Matthews is, last time I counted it was 296. So shooting 296, I've got a 75-pound Matthews. It's the V3X. And this total arrow weight is 451 with that shock adapter and that 100 grain XL. I'm excited to send this through an elk this year. That's what's coming up next. So,
Do you remember or do you know what your front of center is on that setup?
I didn't measure it because I know anytime I go with this arrow with that 75 insert, I'm always between that 15 and 18%. So I know it falls within there.
And just for clarification,
it's probably on the lower end because I'm used to shooting a 125 and loading it up a little bit, but I did back down to the 100 this year for that antelope. I really wanted, for antelope, I've heard it said, I don't know if this is true, but 300 feet per second is an ideal number. So I wanted to get closer to that for that speed. So I'm trying a little flatter trajectory this year than I actually normally would go to. But I'm still at that 450 grain arrow weight. So I know I'm solid for elk. I know I'm solid for basically everything that I'm hunting. So
yeah. I think that's a phenomenal setup for anybody that's out there. It doesn't matter what you want to shoot. It's not too heavy, and it's not too light. And I'll get into my setup here in a little bit, but that's across the board a 450 grain arrow with his setup at 29 inches, a 70-pound draw. That's about like the middle of the road for anybody that wants perfect arrow flight, long range accuracy, and a flat trajectory. So mine's a little bit different. I actually chose to shoot, and I've been shooting since last year. This is the 125 original, so it's the smaller of the two broadheads. He's shooting the XL, the 1/16 inch. This is a sub 1 inch cut at .910. This will leave about an 1.5 inch hole. That'll leave about a 2 inch hole. I shoot this one because I shoot a prototype bow, a little bit slower in speeds, but I wanted that downrange penetration with a little less drag. And my arrow is a little bit different than Brandon's. We both shoot the RIP TKO. Absolutely love. Shout out to Victory. Love the Victory. Victory stuff, but I also shoot a lower profile vane. So the difference between the XL and the original is the original literally doesn't require any vane steering at all. I mean, you could probably almost shoot it out to 60 yards with nothing on your arrow shaft because the head's profile size. So the smaller profile vanes will give you a little bit flatter flight for speed, but like I said, I'm shooting a little bit heavier arrow. So my setup is a 125 original up front, 75 grain collar, the same as Brandon's, on that 250 spine. And my arrow is right now sitting at about 490 grains. And out of the prototype, I'm shooting 263 in a 28 inch draw, and it's not bad. I clobbered an elk last week at 33 yards through the shoulder and out the ribs, and the arrow didn't want to slow down. So I know what I'm shooting is efficient for my setup, but because of the slower bow speeds, I want more kinetic energy. And that's the difference between his setup and my setup.
Mine's more to the speed side.
Yeah, and mine's more the kinetic energy deliverable side because of the lower the shorter draw length and the lower bow speed. So
now I did some calculations, and at 80 yards, I'm still really close to that 50 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Last year I was actually looking for an arrow that would get me 100 yards, 50 foot-pounds kinetic energy, and I ended up going with, I think it was a 465 or something like that. So I know I'm somewhere in the middle of that, but I don't know if this is true, but they say that's what it takes to get through an elk. So that was kind of a litmus test. I try to hover around is to make sure I've got enough kinetic energy at those longer distances. I'm not personally going to take a shot at 100 yards on an elk. However, I just need to know that I've got the kinetic energy at least at the 60 yards, 75 yards, right?
Yeah,
if that big bull comes out, and everything's perfect, the wind's good, and he's totally broadside, I'm going to take a 70-yard shot on an elk for sure.
Yeah. The main thing to take away from this convo is what Brandon and I find is through all our testing, through all the people we've talked to, we've been to how many total archery events?
More than I can count.
All these events and talking to people about where they stand. And everyone has their theories on too light versus too heavy front of center. But what we found as a broadhead company, if you're in between that 15 to 18%, like Brandon said earlier, which this is arrow for me is at 17.2% FOC. If you're in that range someplace, you're going to have great arrow flight. And for all you out there that don't know how to calculate that, there's a simple calculator online. You can actually go out to an open field and shoot different spine arrows with lighted nocks and watch how your arrow reacts when you start bumping down in spine, or basically up in spine down. So you're going from like a 400 spine to a 350 to a 300 to a 250. Reason Brandon and I shoot 250s is because we're firm believers in that arrow getting back to its static form, which is just like this when it hits an animal, versus spinning and bouncing around. We call it pitching and yawing.
Right.
When it goes and hits the animal, because now your arrow has to react to drive straight through the animal. I would rather have my arrow reacting straight when it hits the animal, and all the penetration goes through the back of the arrow, driving that broadhead forward, and the broadhead will pull the arrow through the animal.
And how we really saw that was we did a test one day. We put lighted nocks. We shot at 20 yards. I think it was dusk or getting close to dark. And we lit up the target so that we can see where we were shooting. And we shot our arrows into that target. And our buddy Bobby Glenn at Chasing the Dream, he had a super weak spine, right? And we were shooting 300s at the time, not even 250s. Or no, I think we had 250s to test. So we were shooting into a target. And as that arrow would go through and we hit that target, all of us saw the back of our arrows go like this with the weaker spine arrows. The more stiff that you get, that arrow goes straight through and it just stops. And there's no movement in the back of that. And what that showed us is energy transfer is significantly more efficient with the stiffer spine into the target.
Yeah.
And so your propensity, if you will, to pass through that animal increases significantly using that same energy, that kinetic energy. We didn't increase kinetic energy.
Yeah.
All we did was stiffen the spine, and so energy transfer was more efficient. And that's why we went to a 250 spine.
And what we're talking about, for example, like let's just say you go from a 400 spine arrow to a 250 spine arrow. In all arrow categories, obviously we're particular with Victory because we really love that arrow shaft, but you really only lose or gain, depending on which way you go, a couple grains per inch. So over the course of your standard 28-inch arrow or 29-inch cut arrow, you may go up 4 grains over the total arrow. Do you think out of a tree stand that arrow is going to get to the animal any different than if you went up or down in spine? It's not going to. It's actually going to arrive there at almost the same time, to where the animal, doesn't matter what you're shooting, is not going to know the difference. So there's no reason in not going up to a stiffer spine to get that kinetic energy delivered through that through the substrate. Doesn't matter what you're shooting, a target, an animal, whatever, as fast and as efficiently as possible. So that's why one of the reasons why we choose the 250 spine.
And something to always keep in mind too is the second you add a lighted knock, you're changing your front of center to be less. The second you add point weight, like a shock adapter that's stainless steel over the stock, that's 50 grains versus 75 grains.
Yeah.
Now I'm adding more point weight. Now I'm weakening my spine as well, right?
Yeah.
So you compound that together, and now what goes off that spine chart, it might tell you need to be shooting to 350 spine. And they'll tell you, generally a shop will be like, oh, you should spine down.
You'll be fine.
Or you'll be fine, or maybe error on the side of a spine down. But the reality is if that chart says you're a 350, and then you put a lighted knock on there, you really should be a 300 to 100%. And you're likely should be shooting a 250. But again, we tell guys, don't go off the spine charts. go borrow your friend's arrow or just try a couple
one
different
arrow cut
arrows
from your shop.
Yeah, get one arrow cut from your
It'll
shop.
be worth a headache.
Yep, and go shoot it into a target and see when you hit that target, if the back end of your arrow is wobbling, you definitely can go stiffer. Now, we don't recommend being weaker because accuracy problems, flight dynamics, in general, you can always be weak spined, but you can't be too stiff spined.
Yeah, so that weak spine will give you a lot of problems. And for those that don't understand exactly what we're talking about, it would be like let's just say Brandon's setup right now. He's shooting 100 grain on the front. If he were to take this 125 and screw it on the front, his front of center now actually goes down, and whatever spine he's shooting actually becomes weaker. So when you shoot the 250 spine, you also have a lot of room to play with what you want on the front. You could take our 100 and shoot it against the 125 and see where your drop is, but you shouldn't see a lot of difference because that 250 spine is so stiff, it reacts so much faster and gets back on track faster than a weaker spined arrow. So don't think that speed is always the end all be all when you guys shoot a projectile. Brandon and I spent a lot of time at these events talking more to people about arrow flight, arrow spine, vane configuration than we do in selling broadheads.
Right.
So.
Yep. And keep in mind, we're talking about hunting scenarios, not target archery. If this were true for target archery, then John Dudley and all those guys would shoot 250 spines, when they're shooting, their tournaments, etc. They don't. There's a time and a place for everything. We're talking about hunting specifically, and if you want to increase your efficiency out of your bow, to take the energy and maximize that energy into your target, stiffen your spine up.
Yeah.
So let's move on to a different topic in terms of flight. We get hit up all the time. Hey, my broadheads hit 3 inches left at 20 yards.
Yeah.
Your annihilators hit 3 inches left or 6 inches left at 20 yards. Mm-hmm. First off, our answer to you is no broadhead in the world flies that bad at 20 yards, even the Chinese ones. So it means there's a tuning issue with your bow or something set up. And my favorite is when they're like, oh, but I'm on paper and my such and such broadhead shot here and my field points are hitting here. Yeah. It's got to be your broadhead. Well, okay. Our broadhead holds some of the tightest tolerances in the industry. We hold 0.2 of a thousandth of an inch on the run out of our broadheads on that grind. It's pretty incredible.
Every lobe on that broadhead is the exact duplicate of the one next to them. We don't have cutouts to make weight, and we don't have long blades that stick out to cause turbulence issues. It's exactly the same 360 degrees around that broadhead.
Yep. When you see our broadheads, you shoot our broadheads, they have greater surface area than any other broadhead out there, which means, generally speaking, they're going to be more finicky than something that's vented or like a, I don't know, I'm thinking just any vented broadhead, right? Because that surface area that they have. But they're going to be less finicky than any two blade out there, right? When I say finicky, I'm talking about these broadheads fly so accurate, they will show you the inefficiencies in your bow tune.
Yeah.
For example, a proper tune to us is you shot on paper, not the shop.
Yeah, and that's a starting point.
Right.
That's not the end all be all.
Right. And then once you get that bow shot on paper, then you go out to the range, ideally bare shaft tune at 20 yards, 10 and 20 yards. Some guys shoot out to 40 yards with bare shaft. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You could skip the bare shaft tuning in general if you know that you're on paper and you go straight to a walk back tune or a French tune.
Yep.
You're doing that with with field points, and there's so many articles out there and YouTube videos. Go do yourself, a 5-minute favor and go learn about walk back tuning. It will help you be on target at long range with broadheads and make sure that your field points and your broadheads are hitting the same spot at long range.
And this has nothing to do with our broadheads. If we could just if you could take one piece of advice from what we're saying, is a walk back tune will get your arrow casting left and right out of your bow in the direction that your bow is supposed to shoot it.
Yep.
Even though your field points that you shot are 6 inches to the left and then a broadhead's out to the right, that shouldn't be the case for any broadhead, let alone the Annihilator. When you walk back tune and you can vertically shoot a tape line or a string out to distance, that means your arrow is casting the same exact way straight off your bow. Now you're ready to put on whatever, doesn't matter about our broadhead, whatever broadhead you choose, now you're ready to put on broadheads, and they should fall within that line somewhere. Give or take an inch or two, depending on how far out you shoot and weather conditions and stuff like that. But
this is why we recommend a micro adjust rest, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to take that because we're talking about the difference at 100 yards.
1/16 of an inch.
Yeah, 1/16
one
of an
line,
inch.
one mark line on
Right.
on the standard arrow rest.
Right. You're not even really resighting in.
No.
I mean, maybe an inch, with field points or something. But the idea is to get bring those field points and broadheads together, because a lot of times your field points, they're not going to show you the inefficiencies in that tune because it doesn't take a micro tune in order to get a field point to hit your spot at long range because there's not a lot of surface area on that field point, right? Now, the second you add something that has surface area to it, it's greater inefficiencies in terms of bringing those two together, right?
Yeah.
Now, our broadheads fly just like field points, not because they have the same shape as a field point, but because they have a surface area that has a drag, lift, and weight coefficient that matches that of a field point in flight.
Yep.
Not the same exact weight, the same weight, different surface area, different drag coefficient, but the balance between lift and drag balances out, and that's why our field points hit at long range. That's why our broadheads hit at long range.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got a lot of guys asked too. The other question, besides the flight thing, how easy is it to sharpen? I saw a video the other day where a guy, one of the guys we know is sharpening. You don't sharpen the broadheads with them on the arrow shaft. You take the broadhead off, lay it flat on a stone. Super easy. Anybody can do it. I had my 4-year-old at the time sharpening my prototypes.
Right.
Grab the broadhead, lay it flat on the stone, rip it from back to front, and complete that for all 3 sides. You can actually turn the broadhead sideways and get it off the sharpening stone and run it side to side and sharpen the back side. I think we're the only broadhead in the world as of yet that you can sharpen both the front and back edges on a flat stone.
Yep.
A lot of guys ask why we sharpen the back edges because we don't offer you guys. We had a two requests coming today for practice points. We don't offer practice points because
Don't need them.
You don't need them. Sharpen this thing up. We've one guy, Texas, Hunter Shannon, shout out to him, 80 animals on one 150 XL.
Yeah.
We had multiple guys come up to us at Gauss and at TAC events, 20 to 30 animals on the same broadhead. So, that we get that question quite a bit. And keep oil on them. This is real steel. 4140 carries a carbon footprint. Very much, it's the same stuff that hammers are made out of. If your dad saw you messing with a hammer when you were a kid and left it out in the rain, he'd probably come out and whoop you after a couple hours because he knows, he's smart enough to know that hammer is going to rust. Our broadheads will do the same thing, but the cool thing about them is the entire broadhead itself, including the shank, everything is black oxide, so it's easy to wipe the rust off with a rag and oil. Then you can take the same broadhead, put a little bit of oil on it, run it back on your stone, touch it up, throw it back in your quiver. If you're going to hunt in the rain, you're going to hunt the snow, you're going to hunt the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
The only requirement is our broadhead. Obviously, we're giving you a insanely durable broadhead, but keep oil on them.
Yep. 3-in-1 oil is what we recommend. Out of all the oils that we've tested, whether it be gun oil, rem oil, WD-40, 3-in-1 oil has been, far and above the best oil. In fact, you had broadhead sit out for 2 weeks in the rain that didn't rust at all.
Yeah,
because of 3-in-1 oil.
Yep, 3-in-1 oil. Everyone and their grandfather.
Yeah.
Your grandfather probably has that in his workshop someplace that's been around since the 1800s.
Yeah, right.
You can buy it super cheap, buy it at Home Depot, Ace Hardware, wherever your local hardware store is. Little black and white bottle with a red label. The best stuff that we found to keep the rust off these things. So.
Yep.